we asked them, so why are you suing us? They said, well, John Doe is a Dalit and I am a Brahmin, and so you didn't give him the position because of caste. We said, you've got to be insane to sue us for Dalit discrimination for a position that has gone to a Dalit. In January of 2023, we got so sick of the CRD that we filed a motion to sanction the CRD. Right, this is a public motion, you'll see. You're filing a claim which has no legal or factual basis. Worse than that is you're doing something that's grossly negligent. Even worse than that is a standard which says you did something with a reckless indifference to the truth. And even worse than that is essentially you committed perjury and subordination of perjury. John Doe, this is public record, made millions of dollars in compensation. And they sued Cisco and accused me of a salary discrimination claim that John Doe didn't get a few thousands of dollars. How does a state prosecutor file charges on a CEO who has given away all of his equity, who has arguably, made millions of dollars less than John Doe in his own startup? That's my comp. I took millions of dollars less so that he could take millions of dollars more and sue me. They wouldn't care less. If Governor Newsom is listening, if the Attorney General of California is listening, you better know this, Rob Bonta. You better know this, Governor Newsom. This is your CRD, right? Until today, when I say they couldn't care less, this information has been presented several times in court. Till today, they want to sue Cisco and still want more money for John Doe. Right? That's your CRD.
Namaste, Jai Shri Ram, and welcome to Citti Media. What do you do when you get taken to court for something you didn't do? When your life gets turned upside down by a bogus case based on vicious and false allegations, and all the while you're completely innocent, not a shred of evidence against you. Yet that's exactly what happened to Sundar Iyer, an immensely successful Indian-American tech entrepreneur based in Silicon Valley. He joins us today to share his ordeal with important lessons for all of us, because to be honest, this could happen to anyone, anywhere in the world. Sundarji, namaste, and welcome. So happy to have you here with us.
Yeah, thank you, Navita. Absolutely, thank you.
Now, before we get into the detail of what actually happened to you, I just wanted to start by saying that you've had a very traumatic few years. Now, it must have been a harrowing full-time job fighting this case. Now that you've been completely exonerated, how are you feeling? How has this trial by state, by media, by public opinion affected you, your professional life, your family, your friends?
Right. Now, thank you, Navita. The last, let me be blunt, the last 5 years, 3 in public opinion, and of course, even before the case has been filed, we were dealing with John Doe and then later on the CRD, has been pretty haranguing and pretty harrowing to say the least. I've woken up probably at 3 and 4 in the morning, like 4 to 5 times a week during this process. And the early few years, you pretty much cannot say anything while the case is going on against you in person. And the allegations are thrown willy-nilly. And what I realized in the process is I do not want anybody else to go through what I went through. So there are 2 parts to this. There's my personal story. And while I grew up in India and I've toughened myself quite a bit, nothing can set you up for this kind of public and media, academics piling in, the activists piling in, and of course the CRD. So in a nutshell, it's not been easy, but I have come out of it stronger, and my intention here is to fight this and expose the truth.
Thank you. I think, there's a lot for all of us to learn from this. Let's start off with a bit of your background then. I know you grew up in India. You studied at the IIT in Bombay. How did you make the transition from there to Silicon Valley and the tech space?
Right. I came in 1998 as a student first to do my master's, then stayed on to do my PhD. Very, standard way of sort of coming in as a student. I think the thing that was slightly different was I was also in Silicon Valley because of university, and 1998 was a golden era in the networking space, and that was something I was working on. And so I sort of also transitioned to doing a startup simultaneously. In fact, switched to a work visa so that I could both study and work. And that was my basic transition from undergrad to grad school and tech sector and startups in Silicon Valley.
So it sounds like when you came there and you finished your education, you got involved in running a number of companies, or you set up companies. Could you talk us through how you got to this position in Cisco where this case suddenly was thrust upon you?
Sure. Yeah. Between 1998 and 2018, I did roughly four startups. The first in which I was a junior founder. I was working on what is my bachelor thesis back in India on internet security, and we later on went to founding in Silicon Valley to build a sort of security chip startup. I was a junior founder there. Then did a couple more startups, mostly in the networking and semiconductor space. Some of the work came out of my PhD research, which we then productized, and Cisco acquired both of those companies. Um, and then the last company, which really was a Cisco internal startup, I spent about a year incubating that at Cisco between 2014 and 2015, and then we started it in September of 2015 officially. And that was more in the big data space, where we're looking at formal techniques and mathematical techniques on internet data centers. And so that's where the whole saga started, because I hired a classmate of mine, whom we will call John Doe for the purpose of this conversation, because he later went on to file a lawsuit against me, another manager, Ramana Kompella, and Cisco Systems for caste discrimination. But that's sort of the quick 20-year journey, which brought me to this case and what is now known as the Cisco caste discrimination case.
It sounds like you've had a fairly typical immigrant background in the sense that you must have put in lots of long hours, built companies, innovated, created value for society, and achieved quite a lot of success. So almost like the American dream come true. And then in the midst of this classmate of yours throws a spanner in the works. So tell us exactly what did he do, and what was his gripe against you?
Yeah, so I'll keep the answers focused mostly on the CRD's perspective of the case and John Doe, of course, because just to give you a quick sense, when I hired him in 2015, I gave him I showered him with opportunities. I gave him the highest title, the joint highest title in my group. This is all public knowledge. He was hired as a principal engineer. And then gave him essentially millions of dollars in compensation to join my company. We gave him several leadership opportunities to succeed. A year later, he filed a case of caste discrimination, saying that he did not get the head of engineering position in the startup. And then that led to a bevy of other internal complaints between November 2016. I only knew of his complaint in December of 2016, but he had complained to Cisco HR in the end of November. And then from December of 2016 to essentially Jan of 2018, or mid-March of 2018, when I was around in the group, he filed a series of complaints, not just against me, but other supervisors, managers, and so on. But that formed the genesis of his gripes, which he then went to the state here being the Civil Rights Department, also known as the CRD, and they then filed a lawsuit against us in June of 2020, stating that John Doe was discriminated because of his caste, he was retaliated against, and he was harassed because of his caste. So there are three individual claims that were made against Cisco as a company, and the harassment charges were against us as individuals. So that's sort of the gripe at the very overall level.
Right. And when you say retaliation, I mean, from what you've described, it sounds like you'd given him a ton of money. He'd had very senior positions. So where does this retaliation come in? How does that? It doesn't really make any sense.
Right. Yeah. So the retaliation claim is a cause and effect claim. So just for clarity, under US laws, and I think for most of the world, you have three kinds of claims that can be made in a workplace. Discrimination is a workplace claim where you didn't get something, you were not promoted, for example, is the most common discrimination claim. Retaliation is also a workplace claim, but it is based on cause and effect. So, for example, if you said that your manager was found, pilfering money from your company, and then the manager didn't promote you, that becomes a retaliation claim that your manager did something bad because you complained. So those two claims go against the company, and of course, the individual manager is named and can be accused or whatever. They don't have to be named, but they are accused. And then you have the harassment claim, which is based on your personal behavior against a complainant. So just to set the context of the three claims. Now, on your specific question, his retaliation claim comes from the fact that he claims that some of these decisions that he felt went against him, like not being promoted and stuff, happened because he had complained about me and others a priori. Right? So.
Right. Okay. And have you ever, on the discrimination claim, have you ever considered yourself a Brahmin? Is it something that you were ever conscious of till you got hit with this case, or did it just come out of the blue?
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting question, right? So maybe I should give some context, right? So first of all, what is his discrimination claim, right?
Mm-hmm.
And give you some chronology here. When he had internal complaints, and then the CRD, approached us in terms of filing a lawsuit. He said, "So what are you suing us for in terms of discrimination?" So they said, "Well, John Doe didn't get the head of engineering position in November of 2016, right?" So I'll work on the claim first, and then work on why the Brahmin thing matters, right? Just sort of the top level. So at the foundation level, they have a discrimination claim. We said, John Doe has never applied for the job. We had an open head of engineering position. How do you sue us for a position that he's never applied for? And he's very well aware of it. It's an open position for more than 3 months. Next, they couldn't care less. Next, we told them that John Doe, and this is in public records, John Doe has never shown an interest in the job, right? You've got a year of stuff happening before the decision about who becomes the head of engineering is made. And you have to have a pattern and record to want that leadership position. And Cisco's own court documents show that he's never shown an interest in a management role. Now, besides these two, we asked them, so why are you suing us? They said, well, John Doe is a Dalit, and I am a Brahmin, and so you didn't give him the position because of caste, right? So let's peel that a minute, and then I'll come to your personal question. So we said, if you are suing us because I was bigoted against Dalits, and I knew he was Dalit, let's say, that's your allegation, well, then why did I hire him in the first place, right? I could have gone and hired a ton of engineers in Silicon Valley. Why did I have to go and hire him in the first place? Next, we also pointed out something very critical that was hidden by the CRD in their lawsuit. We said that the position, the head of engineering position, was awarded to another senior colleague of mine who also self-identified as a Dalit.
Right.
We said, you've got to be insane to sue us for Dalit discrimination for a position that has gone to a Dalit. I had a senior Dalit colleague in my team. The guy was brilliant. I hired him too. I've co-founded companies with him. And in fact, it was not just this position that went to a Dalit. All of my leadership positions in my Cisco startup, recall that I was the CEO of this startup, every leadership position, all three of them were first offered to or accepted by this other senior Dalit colleague of mine. So you now have a case where the state of California sues me, and of course sues the company and accuses me of discriminating against Dalits for a startup where every leadership position has gone to a Dalit. And they just hid that. Critical material evidence that they didn't feel was necessary to share with the judge, with the press, with the activists, none of that. Just went with the story. Right?
Amazing.
So that's the explanation. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing that they thought they could get away with something like that. I mean, you're a government department, you're hiding evidence, you're hiding data. I mean, the mind boggles.
Navita, if you thought they could get away with this, I have given you today the tip of the iceberg. If I walk you through the number of things that the CRD has done, this is going to lead to some pretty deep repercussions, to say the least. So let me now come to your first question, this whole Brahmin issue. So how does the state, I want to give you one more piece of the foundation, which is how do they define caste? And then I'll come to how they believe, or they call me or assign me the Brahmin caste. So second level of the story. So how do you define caste, right? This is an essentially unknown concept in the United States. So they started by, banging on the first religion that they loved to beat upon, which is Hinduism. So the state of California defines caste as a strict Hindu religious and social hierarchy. Their words, not mine, right? Remember, this is a state entity. A state has to abide by the First Amendment. A state is not allowed to define a religious practice. They couldn't care less. And that's not just the one sentence. There are more than 15, I would say maybe even 20 references to caste and Hinduism, the practices of Hinduism. They assign caste, they define caste, they compare the castes. And you'll see a number of references on that, which we'll come to later. But so they did that first. So now that they have a definition, they said John Doe is Dalit because he's Hindu. Okay, right? Self-identification. I don't know if the state can make that statement because, you're now talking about a religious practice. And then what do? They assigned me a caste and indirectly a religion by calling me a Brahmin. Now, here's the part that's painful. They interviewed me. They asked me my religion. I told them I'm irreligious for all of my adult life. I've just never been religious. I have a blog that I told them. I mean, it takes about 3 seconds to Google me and find out my webpage, and it's right there. I've been irreligious or atheist all of my life, essentially. They know that. I told them that. John Doe knows me for 25 plus years. He knows that. Almost every batchmate of mine knows that. I mean, it's just like, I'm not a religious guy. I even told them I don't practice caste. I don't wear a sacred thread. And, nothing wrong in wearing that, right? Being of a particular caste is not casteism. They're two different things. Mm-hmm. But I just have never done any of that. I've written short stories against caste. They couldn't care less. They went ahead and made up the whole story and whole claim of me practicing caste to build the foundation of the complaint.
It's unbelievable. So first they kind of force this Brahmin label on you, and then they proceed to attack you for it.
Correct.
And build a whole narrative around it. It is very puzzling. So as you mentioned caste, I think it's interesting to let viewers know that there's so much misunderstanding about caste in the West, particularly. And I know that's a topic for another day, but let's just suffice it to say that historical evidence shows that caste, as it's known today, was imposed on Indian society by the colonizers. And that's a point that hardly ever gets discussed. And it's important because huge lessons can be learned from that, and that can help heal divisions. So prior to colonization, I'm sure you know this already, that India was this diverse mix of varna, jati, kul, gotra, and they were fluid and flexible with movements in between. And then when the British came, they force fitted this incredibly diverse structures into groupings which they called caste. I mean, the word didn't even exist in India before the Portuguese brought it. And the first time it sort of makes its appearance is in the census of 1870, which the British carried out. So they put people into these categories and then froze the categories. And then, if you look at some of the historical literature written by the British themselves, they favored some groups versus others, encouraged friction, basically a classic divide and rule strategy. And I mean, I think modern India is doing a good job of trying to get rid of this colonial hangover. But just from your perspective, as someone who's lived in India and in the US, what's your experience and observation of caste before this case? I mean, I know you say you didn't really identify or practice as a Hindu, but did you come across it in any of your dealings, I mean, in India or in the US?
Well, two aspects to that, right, Navita? One is I'll answer you a specific question about what I see or perceive, and then the general thing about thing. But let me answer the general thing first for a moment. Um, I'm not even an expert on this topic, right, by any means, and almost none of us are. Things are complex. History is complex. Recorded history is a small subset of history, and who knows what. And I'll come to that in a minute. The most vexing thing, irrespective of what caste is or isn't, is you have a State Department that goes ahead and defines caste as a religious entity. The moment they do that, they know they're violating the First Amendment. It doesn't even matter what caste is or isn't. When you go ahead and do that, and the number of examples that they've done, the number of assignment of caste, every employee of mine was assigned as upper caste. They use the word dominant caste. They compare the castes of my employees. They say, is John Doe of a higher or lower caste than Ramana Koppala? They're making these assumptions. They're making these assignments. They're talking about the practices of caste, all within a lawsuit. The state simply has no business to talk about what they believe is a religious practice. That is a fundamental issue, independent of the reality or unreality of caste, right? So I just want to put that out there. Now, coming to your question, which is my personal experience, right? Well, when I came to the United States, what is my caste privilege? My caste privilege was a net worth of minus $40,000. I took a loan to come to the United States. Uh, what has been my experience of caste? Well, my personal experience of caste is, it may or may not exist. There is in India, of course, there's a concept of caste. Just being from a caste doesn't mean anything good or bad, right? Caste is no different in many senses than many other forms of ancestral groups and tribes and varnas or jatis or what have you, right? The importance is, the important thing is the lived experience of discrimination, right? Do castes discriminate against each other in India? Yeah, possibly. Like almost any other country, do people have opinions of each other? Yes. What is the prevalence of discrimination? Much lower than what is thrown out. People confuse prejudice with discrimination. A vegetarian who tells a non vegetarian not to bring their food into the kitchen is obviously not discrimination. That's their preference, right? So, and in fact, the data is quite interesting. I mean, I've been looking up data from India itself. There is no data to support that the upper castes are more violent towards the SCs and STs in India. In fact, I was just reading up a report from the official government reports in India. In fact, the data shows quite the opposite, right? So this thing about, do there exist divisions in India? Of course. Are these divisions based on some naming or grouping called caste? Yes, as much as these divisions exist on everything else: skin tone, language, state, wealth, class. I mean, you have a multidimensional system of classifying and dividing people if you want. It's a complex system.
That's true. And it's very odd that the CRD could have got it so wrong and persisted in the case, and one really has to question the motives. Now, do you get the sense that they were working independently, or was some third party involved calling the shots, kind of telling them the narrative that they had to stick to?
Well, I mean, most definitely, both from public and private data that we are privy to, we know that the CRD has been working with. I mean, it's in the complaint and in multiple complaints, which is the presence of equality labs,
Right.
right? And that's actually a very sad saga in the history of the CRD. Look, I don't treat an organization by any subjective values, right? If you just look at Equality Labs as an objective organization,
Mm-hmm.
they claim that Dalit civil rights organization. Well, let's just put that theory to test. There are probably more than dozens of records of Equality Lab's own statements that are so bigoted against Hindus and upper caste Indians, right? I mean, she literally calls out upper caste Hindus as Nazis. And she doesn't stop there. She starts with, a veiled reference, a direct reference, a direct threat will come for your saffron uncles and aunties. She calls out multiple South Asians and brings them together to say, well, as a South Asian, you need to go after the upper caste. She blames the upper caste for rapes and violence. The data actually shows the opposite. The violent crimes on lower castes are done less frequently by the upper caste from Indian objective data, right? Again, I'm not going to quote that in a scientific paper as yet, even though I read it in a scientific paper, because I always want to be very careful, right? I've read it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to understand more. Let's see more of the data. But these are official statistics from the government of India. But the point is not that. The point is you have an organization that is directly bigoted, right? And how does the state of California work with them to this level of depth, right?
Yeah, because what I understand is that there have been two later reports, the Carnegie Foundation report and Pew Research. And both of these are more recent, more robust. They've criticized the Equality Labs report for being questionable in terms of its sampling techniques. In fact, I recall the Carnegie Foundation called the Equality Labs survey self-serving, essentially indicating that they must have manipulated data to get the results they wanted.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, just talking about the Equality Lab survey, and I always say this. Let's just look at it objectively. I mean, I don't even need to say this. This has been repeated ad nauseum for the last 6 years. The survey is unscientific. They acknowledge that the data sampling is terrible. They did what's called a snowball sampling. This is well known. They went and picked up people. After picking up people, they took the results,
Mhm.
and everyone who said they don't have a strong view on caste, they dropped.
Right.
It's terrible, right? The amount of it is hard to imagine a survey that is more fabricated than that, right? Now, from the CRD's perspective, what is vexing is you should know better. You're supposed to be an impartial, neutral body, right? That is supposed to look, and you have a charter for all people of California. What do? You work with the one organization that is openly Hindu phobic. Fine. Let's give you that for a minute. But then look at the data that you present 6, 7, 8 times in quotes, right? They kept pushing the narrative. And let's pick one of the most significant statistical representations from that survey. They claim that 25% of all Dalits have been physically assaulted or raped by upper caste Indian Americans in America. And here's the worst, simply because their caste was known, right? This is a survey that they have pushed. The judge threw out this. They couldn't care less. They went to appeals court. They pushed the same narrative. They threw even more, fire to it. They said, well, upper caste Indians also spit on Dalits. So, throw a little bit extra. And I'm looking at this, organization, the CRD, and I ask myself this question: how in heaven's name do you stand up every day, look yourself in the mirror, and push this narrative? How do you do this? And Kevin Kish, I mean, I have a direct call out for that man, right? You lead that organization. How do you do this, right? Now, here's the worst part. Let's forget every unscientific aspect of this survey, right? If that claim is true, let's assume that it could be true. That's 10 to 40,000 Dalits who've been physically assaulted or raped or spat upon in the United States. Where are the police records? Where are the police records to show, even assuming underreporting of these crimes, where are the police records? There's none, right? One has to be that unethical, right, to be able to stand up for this. And I always ask this question, which is, who will tell the governor the truth? Right? The truth should be the most important thing. And it's sad when I look at the CRD. The CRD and me and many other people and employees, we should all be on the same side of the truth, right? We all stand for the same ideals. We want the truth. How do we get ourselves in a situation where you have a state agency with endless power, tons of taxpayer money that does not represent the truth? So that's the sad thing for me, for what the CRD has done with Equality Labs.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of questions that can be asked of the CRD, and it's I don't know how they, as you say, go to work every day and look themselves in the mirror and feel good about themselves. This sounds so unethical, and really you have to question, what's the underlying motive behind this? Because you see, you were going through all of this for the last few years, and even though it was a completely fake case, we've had the Seattle ruling that's been one of the outcomes. And we have another law, I believe, this SB 403, that's in the pipeline. Take us through that, and what does that mean for things going forward, and how is it even being justified?
Right. Yeah. So I think I'll piece that into different parts, right? Which is, first of all, just finishing off on your last comment on the CRD. What is their motive, right? What are they trying to do? And I find this really sad, right? If your motive is to help the Dalits, right? If your motive is to help the lower caste, whatever you want to define as lower caste in America, hey, we all agreed with that motive. We all agree with helping people. But you can't have social justice before you first approach the truth, right? To misquote Martin Luther King, I mentioned this: the arc of moral justice is long, but it can never be built on lies, right? When you push a social justice movement which is not built on the truth, it will eventually fail. The truth is a pillar; everything else is a house of cards. Whatever you do for your short-term victories will eventually fail and hurt the Dalits more than what you think you pretend to stand for, right? So with that in mind, I'll answer your question on Seattle and the caste laws and stuff. Seattle was a sad case. I mean, we had not our lawsuit was still going on when the Seattle thing was proceeding, and I could see Shama Sawant, her claims, the stuff they did in the city council. They milked the Cisco case. There are a bunch of Dalit activist organizations, and I should be clear: these are activist organizations that say that they represent Dalits.
Right.
I've known of Dalit activist organizations who represent the truth. They're two different things, right? They milk the Cisco case, treat the allegations as facts, repeat the allegations as many times. Many of them actually know the truth. I have seen these activist organizations read from court declarations, knowing fully well that all of these three positions went to another similarly situated Dalit, also my colleague, right? And they know that they want to hide that to build this narrative of caste discrimination. So they use the same, Equality Lab survey, the anecdotal stuff. They push the resolutions through. I think there was one lady in the city council who said, "Where is the data? Where is the evidence?" Right? And of course, there's a constitutionality of the bill we'll come to in a moment. But they got the law through. I believe they're being sued. And, this is a pattern you're going to see. Someone's going to skirt the process, ignore the constitutionality, show all of their discriminatory intent, and push a law, right? Instead of following, a methodology to get that. Yeah. And I think you were talking about SB 403.
Right. Yes, I was leading because I think that's something where a decision is expected imminently if I'm not right.
That is correct. Yeah, the bill is in the governor's desk, and just to give you some context on that, first there is Senator Wahhab's actions, right, in getting there, and Senator Wahhab is sort of the northeastern Bay Area, Fremont, touching Silicon Valley's eastern border, that district. She's essentially one of our local senators. And to me, it's a very sad saga, what she did, right? Which is, let's forget the bill itself for a minute, but let's look at the methodology of getting there, right? What did she do? She first introduced the word caste on the last day of the bill. She just snuck it in, right? To kill all due process for people who care about that word, being constitutional or not. That's surreptitious, to say the least. Then, her first version of the bill was facially discriminatory. She called out countries by name: South Asia, India, Pakistan, Nepal. She called out colored communities of Africa and South America, and admonished them for caste. Right? That's discriminatory. You cannot pass a law that is meant for particular ethnicities or areas. She knows that, right? She's a young and a smart woman. She did it anyway. Then what did they do? They pushed their way through the Senate. They didn't want any meaningful public consultation on it. She refused a community consultation on caste, right? Fine, you push your bill through, you get it through Senate, it goes to an assembly. The assembly, they face some roadblocks because I believe the Assembly Judicial Committee, had them knock off a bunch of these things which were directly unconstitutional, right? Then she still wants to stick with her word caste because she says it does not target South Asians, right? That's her claim. Now, I look at these things from an independent lens. I don't come at it from is a caste law good or bad? Let's not do it. Right? Let's just go neutral and objective and see what it means. And I ask this question that was raised, which is, people say, well, the word caste is being taught in California textbooks associated with Hinduism. The CRD defines caste with Hinduism. The dictionaries define caste with Hinduism. The general use of the word of caste is associated with Hinduism or South Asia. The activists, including Equality Labs, that pushes these declarations, use caste with South Asian Hinduism. The whole Equality Lab survey is of South Asians. And I ask myself, is this word really facially neutral, Senator Wahab? Can you stand up before a mirror, look at yourself, and say that truthfully? Would you swear before a court under penalty of perjury and say that this word is neutral? I don't think so. Right? If you could do that, well, then we can move the conversation forward. But I don't think she can do that. Here's what's worse. I've seen, these are, video recordings are live on Senate and Assembly Judiciary and other sessions. Floor after floor, room after room of 99% of South Asians, essentially, whether they be people, individuals, activists, constituents, they're all South Asians. Why is a room where you think the word caste is a neutral word filled only with South Asians? Right? How neutral is that word? Right? It's insane. If you look at the representations made by the senator and their activist organizations, they don't stand up to facts. The evidence that she gave is non-existent. Right? She milked the Cisco case. Here's the sad thing. She holds her own constituents guilty of caste discrimination by invoking the Cisco case before anyone's fair day in court. How does a senator do that? That's not my senator. That's not the attitude or behavior that I want from her.
But
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, quoting the Cisco case, that case has been dropped. So is she going to backpedal now, or is she still going ahead building on that?
Well, let's peel that quoting of the Cisco case in two parts. First of all, it's an existing case. An allegation is not fact. Even if the case was not dropped, how do you quote an existing case as evidence? That's terrible, right? If you hold someone as guilty before innocence, and what happens when people lob allegations on Senator Wahab? Will she stand up for the same standard of guilt before innocence? right? Where is the moral courage in that, right? Where are your moral standards, right? Is what I would ask Senator Wahab. She then quotes a non existent Google case. She just throws it there. There is no case against Google. She then uses, I believe, the Equality Labs founder was deplatformed from giving a talk at Google, right? And she has another lady come in, I believe Tanuja Gupta, and say, oh, that's casteism. Well, that's an allegation. The fact that Google did not want a speaker who openly calls Hindus as Nazis is debatable whether they felt it was safer for them not to invite her or whether that's casteism. But that's not evidence of casteism, right? The data that she puts out is just has no basis and no corroboration. And that's what she did time and again. But here's the worst part. She was asked for a community consultation. Her own progressive legislature said, would you want to do a community consultation on caste? Maybe even a survey that's scientific. She refused it. She attacked her own progressive senators so that she could push through the bill. And so I ask myself, I've tried to dissociate myself at a level from all of this. What are the long term consequences of such behavior? Right? You may get a short term victory. Well, good luck. Where do you think that's going to lead to? Right? And that's a more interesting conversation. But that's sort of the nutshell of the process of SB 403 for you. There's a lot more crap that's occurred,
Right.
but here are just a few high level
Yeah, I
comments.
mean, it just definitely raises a lot more questions. I mean, it almost makes either California or the US or this particular senator look like a bit of a banana republic where, there's no proper process. People just pick and choose the data they want for different surveys. These surveys get used to create bogus cases like the case against you. And then the CRD itself, a government department or organization, completely misrepresents the facts, hides facts to build its
Yeah.
case. And then when I think, is it that now, why did they drop it in the end? What made them drop the case?
Yeah, no, great question. So, just for clarity on the dropping, so as of now, the case has been dropped on Ramana and me
Right.
as individuals.
Mhm.
CRD is still suing Cisco. So, give you some backstory on that. In January of 2023, we got so sick of the CRD that we filed a motion to sanction the CRD. Right? This is a public
What does
motion.
that mean,
You'll see.
to sanction?
So, sanction basically, so our sanctions motion, so a sanctions motion basically says that the attorneys have done something which has no legal or factual basis. What they've done is essentially unethical, doesn't meet the standards of what a plaintiff lawyer should be doing, and you want the judge to put it on their record that they have been sanctioned. There's also a small money penalty of $10,000, which the CRD couldn't care less. They're using our taxpayer money, but it comes as a record on the attorneys. And so we went ahead and did that. It's essentially like a brahmastra, right? Of saying, hey, we're not waiting for you guys to go ahead with your case and all of your lobs. We just want to give you a sanctions motion. There's, and by the way, in the sanctions motion, what we said, because we were named and sued for harassment, and we said you have no legal or factual basis. And let me peel that a bit. The harassment charges were on Ramana and me, right? Two individual defendants. Now, harassment is a pretty serious crime. You've got to um, do something personally bad. Your personal behavior has to be bad to be sued for harassment. If you call somebody the N word in the United States, that would be harassment. And if you did that multiple times, harassment also has to be pervasive, right? So a single bad thing you said in a moment of anger to an employee is not harassment. So it has to be really bad and it has to be pervasive. That's harassment in a nutshell. What did the CRD allege? Let's start with Ramana. The worst allegation against Ramana Kompella is that he asked John Doe to file weekly status reports.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah. The CRD knows fully well you're asking a manager who's doing his day to day duties and you're calling day to day duties as harassment. That's how the CRD operates. Now, here's what's worse, and that's why I tell you, I'm only telling you the tip of the iceberg. Here's what's worse. The CRD knows that the request to file weekly status reports, while it's already a frivolous claim for harassment, The request to file weekly status reports came from Ramana's boss, Tom Edsel. Tom Edsel is a brilliant man. He's a white guy. He's an American. And John Doe, under penalty of perjury, has already told the CRD that. Ramana's boss requested status reports and called them into a three-way meeting. The CRD does what? It says, well, let's go ahead and sue the brown guy for a white guy's orders. And this information is known to the CRD under penalty of perjury. I mean, you just look at what a state agency is capable of. And I always ask this question, even today, to Kevin Kish, which is, Mr. Kevin Kish, and that's the head of the CRD, will you tell Governor Newsom the truth? Right? I mean, why is the truth that hard to speak up? Right? Just go ahead and tell him the truth. He's a big boy. He can handle it. Would you tell Senator Wahab the truth? She's a big lady. She can handle it. Right? So this is the sad state of where we're at. Now, that's the harassment charge in Ramana, right? So obviously we filed for sanctions. What are the harassment charges against me? I have no idea. All that they say is that John Doe was harassed. Note, passive voice. John Doe was disparaged. Note, passive voice. John Doe was harassed. Note, passive voice. Saying that you were harassed and you were disparaged is not a harassment claim. You've got to be able to say something very specific, right? And you cannot use your workplace stuff if you say you were not promoted. That's not harassment, right? In 8 years, the CRD has not alleged a single statement that I have ever made to John Doe that is remotely considered as harassment. And so that's why we filed for a motion to sanction. Then let me go a little bit further on this, since you asked me the question about harassment and the sanctions motion. What you see in the sanctions motion is the bottom of 4 bad things that an agency can do, right? You have at the bottommost level what is called, you're filing a request, you're filing a claim which has no legal or factual basis. Worse than that is you're doing something that's grossly negligent. Even worse than that is a standard which says you did something with a reckless indifference to the truth. And even worse than that is essentially you committed perjury and subordination of perjury, right? There are 4 different levels. I can tell you in all, honesty, from every fact I know and that I know that the CRD knows, that they've, dipped into all 4 puddings, if you will, right? So this is the state of California. Right? So we filed a motion to sanction. They dropped the lawsuit in April of 2023, and of course they're still suing Cisco, right? And I wanted to peel one of the claims that they still use against Cisco, which to me is astonishing, and that has nothing to do with caste, right? And that's when I realized something really sinister is happening. They have a claim that John Doe had low pay. Okay? And this low pay claim is pushed the world over, right? I mean, the activists have gone to party with it. The great academics from the great University of Harvard, they've all gone to party with this, all in the, claim of Dalit rights. Well, they have the court documents. And we told the CRD this. This was my 4th startup. And they're well aware that I gave away 100% of my equity to my employees. I didn't take any equity in this startup. John Doe, this is public record, made millions of dollars in compensation. And they sue Cisco and accuse me of a salary discrimination claim that John Doe didn't get a few thousands of dollars in salary, in an annual salary increment. And I just look at that claim. And by the way, there's a lot more facts on that claim that will come out as the private data comes out. Obviously you can see, right? No large company, if you're going to get sued for this small an amount, they'll figure out things to do. You always want to avoid, litigation and nonsense, right? So there are a lot of things we did. But keeping that aside, how does a state prosecutor file charges on a CEO who has given away all of his equity, who has arguably, made millions of dollars less than John Doe, in his own startup. That's my comp. I took millions of dollars less so that he could take millions of dollars more and sue me. They couldn't care less. If Governor Newsom is listening, if the Attorney General of California is listening, you better know this, Rob Bonta. You better know this, Governor Newsom. This is your CRD, right? Until today, when I say they couldn't care less, this information has been presented several times in court. Till today, they want to sue Cisco and still want more money for John Doe, right? That's your CRD.
It sounds like facts were just thrown to the wind and they persisted. They had a narrative and they were dogged in persisting that one. I think one other interesting thing out of this whole case is that you talk about John Doe, and I assume his identity is still not known or is not public. Yet he was the fabricator, essentially, of the case against you. You're the defendant, supposed to be innocent before being proved guilty. Yet your identity was all over the paper, so you were fair game. Why was it? Just doesn't make sense that the defendant is made public and the protagonist is the name's hidden, almost as if he needs to be protected. Is this sort of like trying to create this idea that you're the Brahmin and so it's okay to have you be attacked and you've got to protect the Dalits because they're the vulnerable group? It feels like that's the sort of narrative that's being.
Yeah, I mean, the identity politics in California has anyway reached a level. But what the CRD did, see, I actually don't even want to talk about John Doe,
Okay.
and that's my general thing, which is I have nothing to say about the man, and definitely not in public. And if I'm asked in court and under any deposition or whatever, of course I would answer whatever question. But I have nothing to really say about him. The fact that you can get a discrimination or a retaliation or workplace claim is an unfortunate aspect of life, right? I have a lot to say about his behavior, which will come out in the courts. But the state of California, right? Look at what they did. The state of California claims that caste leads. Let me come to this anonymity thing that they do. They claim that caste leads to violence. Okay, if that's your claim, how is it that you're working with equality labs, which makes violent representation of Brahmins? Right there on video.
Mhm.
They were even given an explicit letter from the Hindu American Foundation telling them, I mean, if you're so grossly negligent that you haven't done the 2-second Googling to know what Equality Labs is saying about upper caste and Brahmins and making these violent caricatures, here's information for you. They don't care. Fine. Next, what do they do? They say that one's caste identity has to be hidden because it leads to violence, right? Upper caste, violent against lower caste, and John Doe being a Dalit, blah, blah, blah. Well, then how did you reveal my caste, right? By assigning me a caste, what you think is my caste. How did you reveal my name? Is the state of California saying that certain castes should be protected and certain castes are fair game? Does Mr. Kevin Kish want to say that the so called, I don't know, 50, 60, 70% of Hindu and Indian Americans in America are fair game? That you want to throw their names out, the so called castes out, while saying that caste leads to violence? Right? Would the Attorney General like to fill in on what he believes should be fair behavior and fair game by a civil rights agency against Hindu and Indian Americans? Right? It brings a lot of questions. Now, on the specifics itself, the whole thing about hiding John Doe's name and revealing my name. Um, to me, the sadder aspect is let me share with you something. It's obviously well known that I had another senior Dalit colleague, right, in the group, and he got all of the top three positions. Here's what I want to let these Dalit activists, these equality labs, and others know. Not that it makes any difference. There were several complaints on John Doe, which of course the state hid. Um, Multiple supervisors, senior, junior engineers, and complaints from a year before his internal complaint of caste discrimination. In all of this process, my senior Dalit colleague, the other senior Dalit colleague, came to me for help in managing and supervising around John Doe, who refused to do assignments that were features that he had to do. And John Doe had a reputation inside from his own emails and HR records. I stepped in for my senior Dalit colleague and said, let me be the fall guy. Let me take the hit. Let me handle John Doe so that you guys can go ahead and execute. That's my role as a leader, right? Leadership demands that you first take care of your people. If I had given that opportunity, I would do that again any day, right? The narrative that the state paints about this whole animus amongst upper and lower castes, it's insane. The only animus in the world is between good people and bad people, right? I mean, that's the primary animus, not necessarily the only animus.
Yeah, true.
We are here to make. Why is it that the other senior Dalit was given all of these positions? Why is the other senior Dalit given the CEO position in my group? Why is it that I've co-founded companies for him? Because of his merit, right? And to hide all of that, right? You've taken the one group where every position, it's arguably a group where a Dalit has made it all the way to America and come to the senior most in Silicon Valley. You've taken that beautiful thing and you've turned it into a toxic narrative to show caste discrimination in America. That's the sad thing about the CRT.
Indeed, that's very sad. Sundarji, thank you. You've been so honest and forthright, and you stood up to bullies, charlatans who twist facts to secure whatever political agenda they're following. Yeah, I think this is a really heartening story of fighting the good fight and winning. So we wish you, peace finally and much more success in the future. Is there anything else that you'd want to bring out before we call this interview to an end? You've told us quite a lot, but in case we've missed anything.
Yeah, thank you for giving me that opportunity first, and thanks for the interview. Here's something I want to say, given where we are, right? You have a bill; it's been pushed this far with multiple pillars that are broken. A case that has arguably been fabricated. Equality Labs, which says they're a Dalit rights organization, but just look at their history. The survey data that was used and cooked up. Senator Wahab's actions, and of course, this whole thing about caste being a neutral word. They've gotten this far, right? Now, what are the consequences of this? I just want to focus on that. If you look at the bill, SB 403, Senator Wahab has a definition of caste which is so vague and overbroad that it includes many terms. They define caste as essentially an inherited status that is roughly four things: a restriction to alter, and then there are restrictions on marriage, some segregation, and discrimination in congregation. By that definition, a poor man is a caste, right? You inherited restrictions on marriage, restrictions on congregation. A poor man can't walk into a rich club, right? And so on. A Muslim woman is a caste, as was pointed out in the Senate, right? Restrictions to altar status, you can't marry outside the religion, blah, blah, blah. Where have you ended up when you push a narrative without focusing on the truth? That's where Senator Wahab has ended up. You have a bill that is so vague, so overbroad, that allows you to sue on many unintended consequences that have nothing to do with caste, right? And if she had taken the time for a community consultation, you'd have seen the 2018 UK study said exactly that. That if you take a narrow concept, try to pretend it's global and neutral, you end up with something that's no different from class, from wealth, from feudal systems, from all other forms of ancestral discrimination, right? So that's where we have ended up. I can only say to finish off, which is, I hope Senator Wahab speaks the truth. I hope Senator Wahab reads her own bill. I hope Senator Wahab tells the governor where she is and what has happened with the bill. If she speaks the truth today, she will be a lot more successful tomorrow. But if you want to take your short-term wins, good luck to you. The truth will always win in the end.
True. Well said. And I think the strange thing is that there's been so little opposition from other lawmakers. It seems to be going through without too many questions being asked. And what's happened to everyone in the executive positions? It's
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was the most mind boggling. And let me tell you this, once I got out of the case, I started spending some time to learn. And to me, I approach everything not from, is this a good bill or a bad bill, but
Mhm.
just to understand the process. I've had sort of a 3 month reboot into the political arena. And just I've talked to legislators to understand. I give you one conversation that was just shocking to me. I spoke to two progressive legislators, right? One of them local in the Bay Area. And I said, would you be asking a critical question on the lack of evidence and the Equality Lab survey, right? Just to understand, you made this claim, and they say, well, we're not really bothered about that. I said, well, a judge has thrown out this survey, and you're going to use this survey as evidence. That's how they've been pushing it. He said, well, we have lower standards of evidence in the legislature. His words. So then I said, you're going to throw a whole Hindu and Indian American population under the bus who have been who have been accused of roughly 10 to 40,000 physical assaults or rapes. That's racial profiling. You're going to let that fly without a single critical question. He had no answer. Not one legislator in the two judicial committees where you ask strong questions asked a single question about the lack of evidence, meaningful constitutional questions, meaningful questions about some of the anecdotes that they gave. Remember, the Cisco judge threw out everything. The Equality Lab survey, they claimed 250 cases of caste discrimination in 2020 alone, since the lawsuit happened. There's not one report of that. There were 30 Dalit women who wrote to the CRD. Uh, no data, no evidence, no witness, no location, no date, no time. All of this was thrown out by the judge. But forget that. You should just have basic critical skills to ask the most modicum of questions. None of them did that. That to me is an extremely sad day in America. When you have an America that does not stand up for the truth, then anything is possible tomorrow. And we're in dangerous times precisely because of that. I don't have a position for or against a bill going in, right? To me, it's not about whether the caste bill makes sense or not. That comes later. For me, it is the process, the discovery, the evidence, the asking critical questions, asking people when they, come up with bullshit, right? When you have someone who says, I have 300 complaints in a sworn court document of caste discrimination, and you can't come up with one court case or credible example, that's very dangerous. And that's the job of a legislature. That's what they didn't do. And so I think California has a lot of major problems, but when people in power, behave the way they do, that takes it up to a whole different level.
Yeah, it certainly looks like a very broken system. Looking from the outside, it doesn't make any sense at all. And one worries that if that's happening in California, is it a matter of time before we see similar things in other states of the US and, spreading from there? Because what happens in the US particularly generally finds its way to other parts of the world. So it's definitely a cause for concern. But, you've been brilliant at being so vocal about it. So what happens to you now going forward? What are your plans for the future? You've left Cisco. Are you going to stay in America, or are you rethinking where to go?
Yeah, so I mean, tech was a fantastic place, right? I mean, you can create things, you can work with intelligent people, you do new things. I was doing a startup almost every 4 to 5 years. There are many beautiful things to do in life. I did find that after going through this, that I had to step in to fix this problem, and I'll tell you why. My next few years are going to be focused on hopefully making California better. And what do I mean by that? It's making sure that people speak the truth, that Senator Wahab speaks the truth, that Kevin Kish speaks the truth, that Governor Newsom works on the truth, that the legislators speak the truth. That's my current calling. I think if we can fix that, we've achieved something beautiful. Can we fix that? I do not know. Um, do I need to be in California, whether I'm doing a next tech startup or stuff? I don't know. I don't see any reason to. If the state treats its entrepreneurs, treats its managers, treats its co-workers, treats its Hindu and Indian Americans, and for that matter, any Californian in the absolute garbage way that they do, with a reckless disregard for the truth, no meaningful citizen who wants to build wealth will ever want to stay in the state of California. And that's already happening. We have 75 companies leaving California. If you can't represent the truth, you will eventually fail. But the smart people and the good people leave much earlier. They don't have to wait for that failure. So that's California for you in a nutshell.
Well said. Thank you. Sundarji, wish you all the best. It's been a very interesting discussion and lots for the rest of us to learn from what's been going on there as well. So thank you very much. Namaste.
Yeah. Thank you, Navita. Thank you so much. Namaste, and appreciate you, taking the time and putting me on your show. Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.